Well, today's sermon is not going to be the greatest sermon ever preached. I can guarantee you that. I hope it's a good one. I hope it's helpful. I hope it's memorable for you. But I'm pretty sure 2,000 years from today, people are not going to be gathered around the world talking about the sermon that was preached this morning at Anthem Community Church by Marty on September 24th, 2023. However, we do have a sermon that was preached that we are still talking about 2,000 years ago. And many would say that it is the greatest sermon that has ever been preached. And that is the Sermon on the Mount. I believe that Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount just once. It just wasn't this one time that he preached the sermon. I believe that that was his sermon. I believe that he preached that wherever he went. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount that we find in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, there's a little story, a little parable. And in this little parable, it's pretty simple little parable. It goes like this. At the end of, you can read along, or if you can open up your Bibles or turn on your Bibles or scroll down or whatever it is that you do. In Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 24. Jesus says, "Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house, yet it didn't collapse because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house, and it collapsed. It collapsed with a great crash." This is a warning. Jesus ends the Sermon on the Mount with a warning. He doesn't end with a pep talk. He doesn't end with a rah-rah. He doesn't end with a pat on the back. He ends with a warning. He says, listen. You have to hear this, and you have to do the things that I'm talking about. If you do, then you're going to be like the wise man. If you don't, you're going to be like the fool. I don't know if you've noticed this in our parable series, which we're ending today, that a lot of times when Jesus would teach a parable, he would contrast two people or two situations. And here he's doing it again at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, a wise man and a foolish man. It's a relatively simple story. In fact, a story like this is taught in all kinds of cultures down through the ages. If you're a wise person, then you'll be successful. If you're a foolish person, you won't be successful. So it's not unique in that. But one of the things that is unique that I think that we've got to understand, what I think is one of the most important aspects of this, is found in verse 24, where he says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them." If you hear me teach very much, you'll know that I will tell you that the three most important words in the Bible are if, and but. Incredibly important words. And here we have the power of and. Jesus is saying, listen, you have to hear what I'm saying, and you have to do something about it. He actually begins the Sermon on the Mount the same way, saying, listen up, listen to what I'm saying, and do something with what I'm saying. Have some action that is in this. We do not have a listening problem. Just look around the room. Look how nice everybody's being at the moment. You're all looking up here, you're acting like you're listening. I mean, you don't have a listening problem. We don't have an information problem. In fact, we live in a time when information is bombarding us. We have so much information. They tell us, the people who study this kind of stuff say that information doubles, like the amount of information that you can know, not that you can understand, just that's available to you. Okay? The amount of information that's available to you. From the time Jesus was born, it took 1,500 years for that to double. 1,500 years from the time Jesus was born until 1,500 AD for information to double. After that, it took 250 years for the known information available to us to double. By the time we get through the Civil War and things like it's 100 years. Every 100 years, the information available to you doubles. By the time we get to the end of World War II, it's every 25 years. The known information to you. In other words, Marty, what do you mean by the known information? The stuff you can Google. Okay? Known information. By the time we get to the 90s, 13 months. Today, what they tell us is that the amount of information available to you will double in the next 12 hours. So by the time you get up in the morning and the time you go to bed at night, the amount of information available to you doubles. We do not have an information problem. We have so much information. Information is all around us. And not only is it so abundant, it is coming at us at an unbelievable speed, constantly coming at us. And it is overwhelming to us, the amount of information that is coming at us. We do not have an information problem. We have an action problem. We don't do anything with the information. And this information is coming at us so quickly. It is teaching us something. In a book titled Amusing Ourselves to Death, the author talks about some of the problems, the biggest issue that we have with all of this information coming. It's not that the information is available. It's that the information is so much available to you, it's teaching you to do nothing. This information that's coming at us is teaching us to do nothing. And he uses the point in history where he thinks it was the tipping point. And he talks about a technological advance that changed the way that the world operates. And it's not the cell phone, and it's not the computer, and it's not the car, and it's not the airplane. It's the telegraph. See, before the telegraph, the only news you knew was the news in your village. So you would wake up in the morning, the news was, Ed's barn's on fire. So what would you do? You would grab buckets and you would get water and you would go help Ed what? Put fire out. And then the next day, what would you go help Ed do? Rebuild his barn. This is what you would do. This is the information. You could do something with the information that you got. Then the telegraph comes in. And the telegraph comes in. Now the telegraph is giving us information from all over the world, and we can do nothing about it. And this is the world that we live in. You get so much information. You hear about the floods in North Africa. You hear about the typhoon in China. You hear about, there's all these things that are happening, and we just get information. And with information. We do nothing, do information. Do nothing. This is the life that we are living. So it's all kinds of information coming at us at an incredible speed, and we don't know what to do with it. Jesus is teaching this sermon to people who were living 2,000 years ago, when it took 1,500 years for the information to double. And what does he tell them? Listen and do something. Now, why was he telling them to listen? Well, most people weren't listening. And why did he tell them they need to do something? Because most people weren't doing anything. 22 times in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls us to action, not belief. I want to say that again. 22 times in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls us to action, not belief. In this little story that he tells, he talks about a wise man and a foolish man. The wise man builds his house on the rock. Now, when you hear house, Jesus is not talking about a literal house. He's talking about your life and every aspect of your life. And he says this wise man built his house on the rock. And then when the storm came and the floods came and the winds came and the rivers raged and all of that, he was fine. The Greek word that Jesus uses here is it can mean different things. It can mean things like intelligence, smart, thoughtful, enlightened. This enlightened person, this intelligent person, this smart person, this thoughtful person builds his life on the rock. So when the storm comes, they'll be okay. And then he talks about the foolish man, and the foolish man builds his house on sand. His foundation is not solid. And when the storms come, it falls with a mighty crash. Now, the Greek word that Jesus uses here for the foolish man is moros. Some of you already know the English word. I'm going to use a word that Jesus used. I just want to say that. I know some of you moms are like, we don't allow this word in our home. I remember when Madison was 7 years old, when we were sitting at the dinner table, and she announced to us that she knew what the S word was. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this. And then she said, Dad, it is stupid. And I said, that is right. That is the S word. And we don't use the S word in our house. A couple weeks later, she said, Dad, I know the F word. And I was like, I was ready for this one. I was not ready for what she said. I said, where did you hear that? On the bus. She never rode the bus again. That is a true story. Jesus says, the foolish man is a moron. A moron. Now, these words are interesting that he has chosen because they are mental words. They are not moral words. They're not feeling words. They are mental words that he is using. And he's talking about building a house, and we think about building a house. He's talking about a life. But even if you just look at what a house was in that time in the first century, a house was everything. A house is where everything took place. All houses were multi-generational. It wasn't like mom and dad lived here, and the kids lived here, and the brother lived here, and the sister lived there. They all lived together. And the land and the houses were passed down from generation to generation. Sorry, real estate agents. There were no real estate agents in the first century. That's not the way it worked. And their business took place out of the home. Multi-generational houses were business where you work from home. It kind of sounds like we're kind of going back to that, right? Kind of feels like in today's world. But he's talking about that, and he says, listen, the wise man did something. What did the wise man do? He heard it, he received the information, and he did something with it. He put action to it. And the foolish man heard the same information and didn't do anything with it. So one man had his house built on the rock, and another man had it built on the sand. We'll talk about the storms in just a minute, but I want to call a timeout. And here's why I want to call the timeout. Because for those of us sitting in a church on Sunday morning, we hear a story like this about a wise man and a fool, or a wise man and a moron, you immediately associate yourself with the wise man. You do not see yourself as the moron. And you probably aren't in some ways. But here's what I want us to do. Don't think of this as all or nothing. That you're wise about everything or you're a fool about everything, because that's really not the way life works, is it? Because see, you can be wise with your body and a fool with your mind. You can be wise with your money and a fool with your time. You can be wise with your work and a fool at home. And you can just flip them. You can flip them. You could be wise at home and a fool at work. You can be wise with your time and a fool with money. I mean, we could go down. The list is really long on what that can be. So as you process and as you hear and listen to this morning, I want you to be thinking about that. You're thinking about, okay, my life is in compartments, because your life is in compartments. Where am I wise and where am I a fool? Where am I building on the rock and where am I building on the sand? And he goes on telling this story about the wise man and the foolish man from a distance. When there is no storm, you kind of look the same. Do you remember before COVID and you look around and everybody seemed somewhat normal? And then COVID happened, and then you're thinking, I never knew they were that crazy. I never knew they were that wacky. And that kind of stuff happens when the storm comes. But from the distance, everything kind of seems the same. But the storm comes. Now he's talking about water and floods and wind. But the storm's not just a physical storm. A lot of times the storm that hits our life is some sort of disaster. Maybe it's a health deal or a job thing. Maybe it's the loss of a dream. Something that you've always wanted. Something you thought you'd always have. And then you get to that point where you realize that's not going to happen. That's a storm. Sometimes it's boredom. The storm comes at us in a boredom. It's boredom. We don't know what to do with our life. We kind of got everything we thought we should have, and what now? Sometimes the storm is poor decisions or the sin that's in our life, or the problem with the storm is this, is that the storm is going to happen. Jesus didn't say if there's a storm. It's when there's a storm. And he says it fell, the foolish man's house fell with a mighty crash. Megale is the Greek word for crash. We get our word mega from it. Something that's mega. Some of you know what a mega Slurpee is, right? It's mega. This is giant thing. And this is this crash that just happens. Now listen. I need everybody to listen to me. Everybody listen to me. This is really important. A lot of people walk away from Jesus because there's a storm. Jesus never promises you that there will not be a storm. In fact, he says there's going to be a storm. Jesus doesn't promise you that he will take you out of the storm. He says that he'll walk with you through the storm. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because he removes the evil? No, because he is with me. Don't fall into that trap of thinking that God's promised you something that he hasn't promised you. There's going to be storms. And sometimes, and I know this messes up some of us. This really messes up. I'm not trying to mess you up, but I'm just going to tell you the truth. Sometimes God sends the storm. I was reading yesterday in the airport. Just got back from Turkey, so I don't even know what time it is. I'm pretty sure it's Sunday because y'all are here. I was reading it yesterday morning in the airport in Chicago, and this is raw because I haven't even had time to process it really. But the statement in the book is this. We make the mistake when we think that we are in control of our spiritual formation. God is in control of our spiritual formation. God's taken us places. God wants to teach us the things that he needs to teach us. And here's the deal. Most of us don't know how to learn a lesson on a beautiful day. It usually takes the storm. The wise man built his house on the rock, so when the storm comes, his house stays. See, a lot of times we think that people crack under the pressure, and that's not true. You don't crack under the pressure. The pressure reveals the cracks. Here's another thing. I think we got to be careful with the storm. Don't use the storm as an excuse. Don't use the storm as an excuse to be whiny or drama queen or king. Take the storm for what it is. But it's interesting. Jesus doesn't say anything about how to control the storm. He says make sure you build your house to prepare for the storm. This is a warning parable. It's not a pep talk. Jesus is saying, listen, he's just laid out the Sermon on the Mount, all of this amazing stuff that he's teaching. He says, listen, build your life on the rock. And now who's the rock? Jesus is the rock. And we have to build our life on him. And when we choose to build our life on anything else, we're going to be disappointed. Listen, your church is going to disappoint you. Your pastor is going to disappoint you. Your spouse is going to disappoint you. Your kids are going to disappoint you. Your parents are going to disappoint you. Your job's going to disappoint you. My goodness, your football team will disappoint you. It's all disappointing. Have you noticed sometimes when it's all great, even that's kind of disappointing? We have to build our life on Jesus and nothing else. I've been teaching this for a long time. We put this up, believe in Jesus. And we hear this a lot. You go to church, you think, of course, I need to believe in Jesus. Yes, I should believe in Jesus. Yes, and you should. But here's what we teach a lot around here is this: we got to take the in out. And we got to get to the point where we believe Jesus. Because believing in Jesus and believing Jesus, two different things. Those are two totally different statements. But here's where I'm at right now in my life and in my spiritual walk. I think God's leading us as a church. It's more than even that. It's this. It's follow Jesus. If he begins the greatest sermon ever by saying, listen, and do. And he ends the sermon by saying, listen and do. I think we have to pay attention to that. That we've got to pay attention to this, that I need to follow Jesus. Look at this. Jesus wants to transform me, not inform me. Jesus wants to transform me, not inform me. And see, you're an information junkie. I know you're an information junkie. You love to learn. One of the things I hear a lot about after a sermon is, I just learned that today. And I hope you learn things. And I want to teach you to learn things. And you should learn. You should love learning because education is what makes you successful. You go to places and parts of the world where they're not successful, there's no education. Education is incredibly important. We need information, but we can become an information junkie. And it's just, I just need information. Give me. That's why gossip is so tasty. Gossip is so tasty because it's information that you're not supposed to have. Ooh, this is juicy information. Ooh. We can't be information. Jesus wants to transform me. John Mark Comer talks about a false formula that's so present in so many of our churches today. And I think this is so the first one is information. Like, give me information. But should the church have Bible studies? All right, y'all are not real sure about that. Should the church have Bible studies? Yes. Should we know what the scripture teaches? Yes, we absolutely should know. We should have information. Information is good, but here's what we fall into. We say, okay, information plus inspiration. All right, now we got the inspiring and it's funny and it's good and it's engaging and it's all of these kind of things. Now we've got information plus inspiration plus willpower equals transformation. If I'll get the information and it's inspiring information and I'll put some good old willpower to it and I'll be disciplined, I'll be dedicated, then that's going to transform me. And John Mark Comer uses this example. This is a beautiful example. Flossing. He says, I go to the dentist and I get the information. He says, only floss the teeth you want to keep. So that's inspiring, right? You get the information and then you get the inspiration and then willpower. And you floss twice. And then 5 months and 28 days later, you go back to the dentist and he says, well, only floss the teeth you want to keep. And then you get the willpower and you go home and you floss for 2 days. It's a false formula. Information and inspiration sprinkled with a little willpower does not transform you. Biblical knowledge will not transform you. Biblical application will change your life and your eternity. And this is what we are called to do. So it's a few questions. few questions. Where am I being wise? Where am I being wise? Where am I being a fool? And I hope you'll take your journal. I hope you take a piece of paper sometime this week and say, okay, what parts of my life, where am I being wise? And then where am I being a fool? And then the third one is, where am I seeking the way of Jesus? Where am I looking to actually do the things Jesus did? Not just believe in Jesus. And not just even believe Jesus. But actually do the things that he says to do. Where am I being a fool? Where am I being wise? And then add this question. What do I need to do next? And don't make a list of 15 things. So you're an information junkie. And so you want to change 15 things by Thursday. Okay? Just come up with one. See, some of you are leadership junkies. And you'll read 15 leadership books a year. You know what you should do? Read a chapter in one and then do that for 12 months. You'll be a better leader. Some of you have got to stack this high Beth Moore Bible studies. And you're mean as a snake. What's up with that? So you can know the book of Romans. You know everything about it. And be a moron. We got to put it into action. Build your life on Jesus. Build your life on the way of Jesus. Let's do the things that he did. Practice the things that he practiced.